welcome everyone tonight. I'm Penny. I'm the owner of Analog Books. This is fantastic. What a great turnout. Stephanie, who many of you probably already know, came to me a few weeks ago and asked if maybe they could do this as a Rogers TV community information, local events evening. And we thought that was a really good idea. We had done one a couple of months ago, and so now we're thinking of maybe making this like a monthly or every couple of months kind of thing. So that's pretty exciting. For those of you who don't know, Analog Books, we opened in 2020, so we're just heading into our fourth year now. For us, we love supporting local authors, so we love nights like this. In the meantime, tonight we have 3 local authors that we're going to feature. Charlie and Samantha and Michelle and Stephanie. So Charlie did his book launch here, like a year ago or so, yeah? And so sci-fi, so I'm gonna call Charlie up and let him tell you about himself.
All right, well, thanks so much for the introduction, Penny, and thanks so much to Analog Books for hosting the event here. This is, it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to read to you tonight. So I guess I'll probably just get into it. It's science fiction targeted at young adult, but accessible to all over. The last time I did a reading from First Command was actually I was invited to my youngest son's grade 5 class to do it, and I was really excited, but I walked in and I realized it wasn't just the class, it was the entire school. And so I was reading to about 500 kids in the gymnasium. So it was fun. And I think the kids really enjoyed it. So I'm happy to share it with you tonight. The reading is it'll take up maybe about 15 minutes or so. And then I think maybe brief time for questions, and then we'll just trade off to the next author. All right, so this is First Command. First Command came out in 2021. I have the sequel, Fractured Command, which came out just last year, and I'm hard at work on the third book in the series, which should be released this fall. So, Chapter 1. An old space corvette appeared in the Dien star system with a thud that sent gravitational ripples through space. Cassiopeia Requin slammed against her restraints. Her gut squeezed bile up the back of her throat. Cassie tried to hold her chin up, to breathe in the cool, recycled air. She tried to project confidence from within her bright orange pressure suit. The flight instructors were watching her, evaluating her, assessing her character as much as her technical competence. For the duration of the mission, Cassie was the acting commander of the AEFS Triumph, and mission commanders did not barf. With the transit sequence complete, the other cadets ran through their post-transit checklists, verifying that the Triumph's critical systems were operational. Life support, go! Axon, go! Signals, go! The 7 cadets on board were strapped into control stations, safe inside self-contained pressure suits, and double-bubbled within the spacecraft's pressurized command module. A glowing blue and white planet bathed them with a serene light through the module's windows. They had come out of the transit close enough to see the mix of oceans, clouds, and vast patches of land on Dien. As much as Cassie wanted to admire the beauty of the alien world, she had to focus on the challenges in front of her, get the Triumph into orbit, and execute the drop. The transit process was subject to uncertainty. For an instant, they had been encased in a superluminal warp field, an isolated bubble that crossed light years in a matter of seconds. Then the warp field collapsed, and they appeared more or less where they intended to arrive. But they didn't know the precise location in relation to the planet. Without guidance buoys, they needed a series of radar measurements to establish their position. And Cassie had to keep her breakfast at the bottom of her esophagus. All systems operational. Bauer, the cadet acting as the mission's executive officer, stopped in the middle of his report. "What is it, Pelly?" "We're too close for the velocity we're at, sir." Cassie's gut gurgled. She tried to concentrate on the orbital mechanics. Wrong velocity. If they were traveling too fast, they wouldn't fall into orbit. They could get flung out into space, well beyond DN. They had to execute a braking burn. Humid air fogged the inside of her helmet. The two flight instructors at the back of the module watched the cadets, watched and judged. Every cadet had to qualify as an astronaut, earn their stars. To do that, they had to fly a decommissioned Corvette out to an arbitrary planet, establish a stable orbit, drop a landing shuttle on it, and return with a viable soil sample. If you failed, you washed out of the program. So far, they were doing all right. Having simulated the mission dozens of times, prepared for countless problems, the cadets knew what they were doing. All they had to do was get their spacecraft on course for a stable orbit. Commander Dodd, the senior instructor, glared directly at Cassie from inside his helmet, his woolly eyebrows low over his eyes. He tapped the tablet cradled in his arm with a stylus. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't just Cassie's astronaut qualification on the line. If one cadet failed the exercise, they all failed. "Navigation." Her stomach did a somersault. "Calculate the correction." "Aye, ma'am." Bile crept up Cassie's throat. She couldn't keep it down. "Bauer, you have the con." Her second in command glanced at her, eyes wide, as if to ask what she was doing. A mission commander didn't just hand over control of the mission. Not like this. "Aye, ma'am, I have the con." Cassie unbuckled from her control station and launched herself through the microgravity environment to the little sanitation cabin at the back of the command module. She flung open the door, grabbed the vacuum cleaner toilet hose with one hand, and pulled at her fishbowl helmet with the other. Her stomach heaved, the muscles in her gut constricted without permission. Her gloved fingers fumbled at the latch. It wouldn't come off. She tried to hold it down, but the rocket had launched. A burning mix of stomach acid and liquefied omelet breakfast erupted through her mouth and nose, splattering against the helmet's face shield, and bounced back into her face. Cassie clawed at the latch. The warm vomit blurred the transparent visor and crept down the back of her neck in the rest of the pressure suit. Someone grabbed her and pulled her back. They popped off the helmet. Mucus globules of stomach flotsam burst from her helmet into the command module. They coalesced in the absence of gravity, floating, sticking to Cassie's hair and skin, scattered through the enclosed cabin space. The other cadets tried to contain their reaction. Grunts and ugs were stifled, but not completely suppressed. Amika Junko grabbed the hose and pushed the funnel up to Cassie's mouth. The machine latched onto her face and sucked away everything else that came up with an awful slurping that resonated through the otherwise quiet module. The junior flight instructor, Lieutenant Singh, drew his hands up and pressed fingers against the transparent polymer of his face shield, as if to cover his mouth. Amika patted Cassie's back as globs of puke latched onto her own suit. "Easy," she said, her voice calm, as if this happened every day. "Take some deep breaths. You okay, Cassie?" With her stomach empty, the wave of abdominal convulsions passed. Cassie took a deep breath of cabin air, trying not to inhale anything solid or liquid floating around in front of her. Amika used the hose to suck at the jelly-like floaters, catching the lion's share of them, the system making a wet gurgle each time it caught one. Lieutenant Singh, Commander Dodd, Pelly, Croyle, Quinton, Sajani, Bauer, they all stared at Cassie. She wanted to push Amika out of the way and lock herself in the washroom. She wanted to cry. Even beyond failing as a leader, there were consequences to these kinds of accidents. Assuming she hadn't just washed out of the entire program, for the rest of her career, she'd be known as the cadet who barfed all over herself in a pressure suit and caused her crew to fail their astronaut quals. Dodd scribbled on his tablet. The Triumph rumbled. Social catastrophe aside, They were still going too fast. Commander Dodd hadn't actually said the word fail yet. In fact, he hadn't said anything at all. Neither had Lieutenant Singh. Dodd just kept tapping his stylus against his tablet. Tap, tap, tap. Emika wiped some of the splatter off of her own face shield. Are you all right, Cassie? Cassie took a couple of deep breaths and placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. You need to get back to your station. Emika was the navigator. To correct their velocity, she would need to calculate the burn. With as much grace and dignity as she could muster, Cassie wiped out the inside of her fishbowl helmet, secured it in place, and returned to her console to resume command. The blatant mix of disappointment and frustration on Bauer's face did not escape her. He didn't say anything, but he'd come into the mission already upset that she hadn't been selected to command over him, or that she had been selected to command over him. His test scores were higher on almost every metric the program used. Bauer deserved to be the mission commander. Yet he was in the number 2 seat, and she had just blown the mission. Bauer and everyone else had been so fixated on her, they hadn't done anything about the fact that the Triumph was about to shoot past the planet it was supposed to swing around. Cassie buckled herself back in at her station and cleared her throat. Bauer double-checked the orbital position and velocity. She didn't see him roll his eyes, but something in the way he delayed his movement and turned away from her suggested he didn't feel the task was a high priority. Pelly showed Bauer the radar numbers. Pelly was only 14 years old, and the youngest kid who'd ever earned his way into the Cadet Corps' astronaut officer program. See? Bauer furrowed his brow, then shook his head. Relax, Pelly, we're fine. No, sir, we're not. We're too close to the planet. Bauer tapped his display. This is our position right here. Axon is updating the velocity as we go. We're in the recommended tolerance. Axon was the Triumph's supercomputer. Axon's reporting wrong. The radar reading is off. How could the radar reading be off? It's radar. Even though Pelly was a prodigy of sorts, he often got overzealous. I'm not sure, sir. Maybe it's bouncing off the atmosphere or something, but it's a few hundred kilometers out. We're traveling too fast. We need to brake now. Bauer reached over and tapped Pelly's terminal. You focus here on control systems, life support, engineering stuff. Navigation is Junko's job. Making sure she's doing it right is my job and Axon's job, and Axon says it's fine. Pelly looked like a kid trying to explain something to a parent who'd already stopped caring. What does it matter who figures it out? Quantum scale errors in the spacecraft transit process, amplified over light years. A spacecraft could only transit so far before it had to stop and assess its position. When the Triumph appeared in orbit, it had to measure its position relative to the planet and adjust its velocity, which it had done. Emika checked that the instant they arrived. Bauer double-checked it. Now Pelly said it was wrong. How do you know Axon is off? Cassie asked. I have an astronomy app on my tracker. If you know how large something is and you take a picture of it, you can calculate how far away you are. You want us to trust a freeware app over a supercomputer? Bauer said. Pelly didn't waver. I want you to trust basic geometry. How could the radar reading be off? Emika asked. I don't know, Pelly admitted. Maybe the radio waves are bouncing off the ionosphere. Maybe it's a software glitch. But if we don't do something fast, we're going to blow right past this planet, and we won't complete the mission. Croyle, the cadet at the spacecraft's helm, looked back and forth between Pelly and Bauer, then over to Cassie. What should I do? Cassie swallowed. Not only had she just been utterly humiliated, but now she had to choose between Bauer and Pelly. That shouldn't have mattered. It was a physics question, but she shouldn't just pretend that Bauer wouldn't find a way to retaliate if she sided with Pelly. And if she sided with Bauer, Pelly would shut down like a turtle pulling into a shell. She glanced at Lieutenant Singh as if he might offer a hint. You're the mission commander, Cadet Requin, Singh said. Don't look at me. the putrid aftertaste of vomit weren't doing much to help her focus. Wasn't doing much to help her focus, but the fact that the lieutenant said anything at all was promising. If they had already failed, it wouldn't have mattered what she did. Cassie took a deep breath. She'd always thought it would be so much fun to sit at the command station, so important, so powerful. She'd been ecstatic when she'd realized she'd drawn command for the mission. But then the pressure to shine bore down on her and kept her up for nights on end, running through the math, the drills, the potential errors. At least now that she'd barfed, any pressure to shine was off. Mathematically, Pelly was right. It was better to go with the math and sort out the social consequences than the other way around. Cadet Junko, Cassie said, calculate a braking burn using Cadet Pelly's revised position coordinates. Bauer rolled his eyes. Both Singh and Dodd started writing, aye, ma'am. Bauer adjusted the restraints on his chair, shaking his head. Crew, prepare for retro burn. I've got the correction, Emeka announced. Bauer confirmed the calculations. Execute braking burn on your own time, Helm. The Corvette shuddered as thrusters flared. The crew were thrown forward as if someone had just flipped a gravity switch on the front end of the room and dialed it up to high. Cassie's pressure suit constricted around her to keep her from passing out. She closed her eyes and concentrated on keeping her stomach steady. When the rumbling stopped, she checked the Triumph's trajectory. Everything looked good. Pelly? The cadet checked the tracking computer on his left forearm. We're good, ma'am. The radar is still off, though. Cassie looked at Dodd. Same cold grimace. Bauer didn't say anything. Emeka put the outside view back on the main window, flooding the bridge with so much light that Cassie had to squint. Just like that, they were back on track. Now, they just had to prep the dropship, drop it, pick up some dirt, and repeat the transit back to Avalon. Easy. In her peripheral vision, she caught Dodd and Singh glancing at each other. The cadets hadn't failed yet. They could still pull this off. But then Bauer cocked his head at his terminal. What's wrong? Cassie asked. Well, I don't know if this is what was throwing our radar off, but there's another spacecraft in orbit. Dodd leaned over and checked Bauer's terminal. His eyebrows lowered. That's not supposed to be there. And that is the first chapter.
So both Charles and Stephanie have actually done their book launches with Analog, but tonight it's my pleasure to have met some new local authors. They've actually come in from Raymond. I haven't met them before tonight. They've done an unexpected arrangement, which is called A Sweet Romance. For anybody that's not like totally up on book talk, romance is the hottest selling thing on the planet at the moment. The biggest author ever right now is Sarah J. Maas, who has one series of 8, and then another one of 7, and then another one of 3, and she is just taken off like insane. So anything that's romance, fantasy, romantasy is like super hot right now. This is the other end of it. Sounds like it's called Sweet Romance. Maybe not as much other stuff. More PG. In the trade, we call it mommy porn. So, anyways, I would like to, some of you know these people by somebody different, but I'd like to invite up Samantha and Michelle to present tonight.
Okay, like she said, this is our book, and we'll just do a little. Can you hear us? Okay. All right, so we wrote a book, and we are really excited about it. And we've never done a reading, so please bear with us because we are a little nervous. The butterflies are in full flight today. So this is Samantha A. Curtis. This is her pen name. My pen name is Michelle Hunstrom. And we have We have been friends for, oh, good grief, over 20 years. We
It's been a
met
while.
in grade 5. We grew up together. We graduated together. And we have been friends the whole time. I never knew that she liked to write until we both were in college, and we were like, oh yeah, we've written and we want to be published. And, you know, it was always kind of a pipe dream. Oh, we would like to, but never really thought anything would come of it. And then I'm just going to skip to this part. So we had an opportunity in 2020 during the pandemic. We suddenly had a lot of time. And we found this contest through Storymakers.
It's a conference put on in the States.
Yeah, in Utah. And it gave us 5 months to write a novella. And so we decided, you know what, we've got the time. Let's
Go
do
for
it.
it.
Let's do this. We had previously attempted to do a co-authoring project, and it failed dismally because we did not know how to work together to create this project. And so then we decided,
To kind of, so we took on the idea of doing the book in the first place. It had some stipulations on kind of what the story had to be, and so we went through that process. Then we decided that we would kind of ping pong between the two of us. So I would write, we started out saying, 500 words, and then I would write it and then send it to her. She would read what I had written, and then she would write the next 500 words. It ended up being a whole lot of fun because then you're like discovering the story as you go. We had planned it out, so we knew how it ended, but like reading what the other person had written was just like a lot of fun.
yeah, we had created a kind of a skeleton to follow, and discovering the details was a lot of fun and made the project go by really fast. We wrote it in about 5 months, edited it in about 15 days, and sent it off. But it worked out in our favor because we got an honorable mention in this contest, and so we won a full editing package. And then we had all the files, and we decided to pursue self-publishing.
Yep.
And so then we published the ebook first in 2022, and
Just this past November, we decided to stop being a stick in the mud and work on the physical copy. So we got that out in November, this 2023.
yeah, we learned a lot. We had a cover change. You learn a lot in the self-publishing business.
Yeah, we discovered that the cover that we had wasn't working, so we got a new one.
Got a new one, and I like it a lot better. It tells about the genre much more, which, as has been told, is a sweet historical romance set just after the Civil War.
Yeah.
So on to the book. This is about a woman who, just after the Civil War, is trying to find her independence, trying to escape the controls of her parents, and she meets a few fellows. One is a awful person, and one is, as we all know, the love interest, because
Would be a
romance
without
needs a
that.
love interest. So we are actually going to read, I don't know about you, but my favorite part of a romance book is the meet cute, when the main characters meet. And that doesn't happen until chapter 3, so that is where we're going to start. So just a quick backstory. Kate Morrison
Yep.
is our main character. She has just opened a new shop. She is a seamstress, and she's really excited. However, there's a few characters in the background who are kind of lingering and putting a little bit of issue into her fulfilling this dream. And so she's making some friends, she's made an enemy, and now we're just kind of in the middle of her day.
All right.
So this is dual point of view, so she will be reading our heroine's perspective, and I will be reading the hero's perspective.
Okay. So chapter 3. 2 days later, Kate smiled as she pulled the door to her shop closed. Her business was slowly building as the woman in town showed more and more interest every day. She turned to link her arms through Beth's, who had been waiting for her to finish the day. So, Beth, how has your day been? Oh, Kate, I don't know how. I am going to make it through the next few days. Jesse said he'd be arriving sometime either tomorrow or the day after, but I find myself staring out the window every chance I get. Mother's getting tired of it. How was your shop today? Kate chuckled. Nobody could jump from one topic to the next like Beth. Things are going well. Getting the shop had been the hard part, and it still needed work, but she was open for business. In the last 2 days, I have gotten 5 dress orders and a number of fabric purchases. She opened her arms wide and smiled. My business is finally growing. That's wonderful, Beth said, before giving Kate a knowing smile. But just wait till you fall in love. I thought I was happy too till Jesse started courting me, and there was so many handsome men in Brixton. I'm sure any one of them would do for you. The smile on Kate's face froze in place as the idea of marriage rolled coldly through her. She took a breath. While I am delighted for your good fortune, Beth, I did not come here to get married. I don't know if I will ever want to. Beth dismissed Kate's words with a wave. You say that now, but you will change your tune when the right man comes along. Mr. Dixon sure seems taken with you, and Jesse mentioned his friend drew the eyes of many ladies wherever they went. He must be very handsome. Oh, or particularly gruesome, Kate said. Her friend giggled and continued walking. Kate was grateful for Beth, wanting her to be happy, but Kate was uninterested in any matchmaking efforts. It wasn't that Kate didn't want to experience love, but she didn't want her life to be defined by something, or she wanted her life to be defined by something more than just being female and who to get married to in order to matter.
Boone Carson had been hurting for some time, but he wouldn't admit it. The gash in his leg wasn't healing like it should, and he blamed his horse for constantly jostling it. Although he figured a bumpy carriage ride wouldn't have been much better. You don't look so good, Boone, Jesse Conrad said. Boone's friend and riding partner had become more insistent that Boone stay in Jesse's hometown for a few days to rest. You worry too much, Boone said, forcing a smile. If it makes you feel better, I'll stay the night and leave first thing in the morning. That Reb sliced your leg up real bad, Jesse said, his eyes filled with concern. And he probably never washed that knife a day in his life. The pounding in Boone's head seemed to increase, but he brushed it aside. If anything is going to find me laid up for a few days, it's your doctoring skills. Boone's attempt at humor was ignored by his friend, but if Boone was honest with himself, he had grown more worried about his condition as the days wore on. We should be at Brixton by this evening, Jesse said, wiping the sweat off his brow as he looked at the sun. A day sooner than you thought. Could you be impatient to see a certain young lady? Boone teased, lightly smacking Jesse's arm with the back of his hand. He held in a groan when the movement caused him pain. If Jesse noticed, he didn't say anything. You know I am, Jesse said. How long is it going to take you to ask her to marry you? Today, I reckon, Jesse said with a broad smile on his face. Boone looked at Jesse. How is he so excited about getting married? Sometimes life and love are confusing. Good. That young lady deserves a medal after having to wait on you all this time, Boone laughed. His thigh throbbed with the exertion, and he coughed. Jesse gave him a sidelong glance, but stayed silent. You going to talk to her daddy before you ask her? Boone asked, trying to fill the silence. I asked him before we left. And you're sure she didn't find someone else? Boone turned his face to face his friend, but pain shot up his leg again. I got her last letter in Louisiana just before we left, and it didn't mention meeting someone else. But if she did in the month we've been traveling, I would keep on riding and go north with you to your family's ranch. I'd work myself to death with you as my taskmaster, Jesse laughed. But I'll have you know, if you weren't injured, I'd be there already. Shoot, I could have been married for a week by now, Jesse teased. But Boone could see the worry behind his dark brown eyes. Jesse continued, Beth is the most beautiful woman I ever met. You'll be a lucky man if you can woo someone half as pretty as her. Boone smiled grimly and shook his head. You know I ain't planning to woo anyone. I just don't have that drive in me anymore. I know what you said, but life has a funny way of handing you things you didn't think you'd need. Jesse smiled and started whistling an old battle song. They rode in silence for a while with Jesse's whistling and the plodding of horses' hooves and the only other sounds. Boone thought about their conversation and the letter he'd sent to his mama months before. He wondered how she had reacted to his request. So as not to alarm her, he had agonized over every word. Mama, I look at my current circumstances and outlook on life, and I know I cannot offer much. I do not know how much love I have to give, but I think you could help me try to at least lead a comfortable life. This war has taken away any inclination to properly woo and wed a lovely lady. I ask that you take on the task of finding a suitable companion for me upon my return. I'm trusting your judgment. I must say that after writing this request down, I feel relieved. It's as if a burden has been lifted from my chest. Despite feeling relieved, Boone didn't know if he had made the right choice. What he did know was that the war had scarred his soul. He wondered if his sweet mama had done as he asked, or if she was waiting to chastise him when he returned. If he returned. The pain in his head and his leg had worsened in the last few hours, and he was having trouble sitting straight. His eyes drifted to the gash on his leg. It was rimmed with dried blood and oozing white and yellow pus. The skin around the wound was an angry red. He didn't even want to think about touching it. Maybe staying with Jessie for a few days to get the wound looked at would be for the best. Though the sun was beginning to set, Boone could feel sweat pouring down his back. His water was running low, and his vision was beginning to blur. He hoped they would arrive soon. Jessie let out a triumphant whoop when they finally saw the distant shape of buildings. Go on, Boone said softly, using every ounce of energy on sounding normal. With a smile, Jessie spurred his horse forward and was gone in a splash of dust. Boone took the ride slow. With every second, he felt weaker and weaker until he realized he wasn't directing his horse at all. The disappearing heat was making him cold, and his mind clouded with exhaustion.
The pounding of horses' hooves interrupted Kate's thoughts. As the woman looked behind them to the edge of town, Beth gasped in excitement and let go of Kate's arm. Squealing, she ran toward the rider, one hand holding her skirts and the other waving frantically in the air. "Jessie!" Beth's voice was joyful. Kate watched a tall, strong rider come up to Beth and leap off his horse. His dirty blonde hair poked out from under his union hat. He gathered Beth in his arms, holding her close. His hat and scraggly beard shaded most of his face, but his slim body was relaxed as he held her. Beth's fears about her beau were obviously unfounded. Kate watched the happy reunion until a second rider caught her eye. His horse was moving slowly, and the rider's body was slumped forward over the horse's neck. Barely remaining in the saddle, Kate recalled that Jessie's letter mentioned his friend had been injured. She rushed toward the rider till she was in front of him, and the horse slowed to a stop. Remembering the medical lessons she'd learned at her father's side, she could see how, now that his face was too pale and weary, his dark hair and beard were long and unkempt, and he looked underfed. But Kate couldn't deny that he was a handsome man. She shook her head to refocus her thoughts. Kate worried about the soldier's condition. His union uniform was unbuttoned, and she could see the dirt below, and almost completely soaked with perspiration. He didn't look at her. In fact, his eyes were half closed. She took the horse's bridle in her hands, intent on leading it to the boarding house. "You don't look well, sir. You need to lie down."
Time slowed as Boone's remaining energy drained from him, but when his horse stopped abruptly, he heard the melodic sound of a woman's voice. He managed to lift his drooping head and look up. Boone saw a woman, a very pretty woman. The fading golden rays of sunlight reflected in her dark chestnut hair, and her deep brown eyes looked heavenly and warm. He could use something warm right now. He grunted. I must be dead if there are angels around. The woman moved to lead his horse, but Boone's strength was spent. His body slipped from the horse's back, and he hit the ground as darkness finally took him.
My book is a historic fantasy novel, and I've been working on this book for a very, very, very long time. most of my lifetime since I was 12. So it has changed quite a bit, but it's at a place where I felt satisfied to publish it. So I will read a little bit of the prologue for you guys. Hopefully I don't stumble too much. We'll see. I shot up from my bed at the sound of someone knocking on the front door. The pounding knocks echoed through the hallways of the brown brick house, causing the small picture of Father hooked on the back of the door to shake and in protest. The picture fell to the ground, the glass shattering. Gasping, I tiptoed past the shards of broken glass. The pounding at the door was becoming restless. Sighing, I realized I would have to clean this up after I answered the door, since Mother had her hands full with Tara mouthing off again. Thomas, sound asleep, his snores lightly rumbling, and the twins and Anna rambunctious footsteps as they ran, wreaking havoc around the small townhouse we all shared. Walking through the hallway and towards the front door, I reached for the doorknob. A feeling of fear caused me to hesitate. I did not know at the time what it was exactly, but a warning filled my heart. It's nothing. You've kept your guests waiting for far too long, I thought. I took a deep breath before opening the door to see a tall Nazi holding a hat with a protruding front rim that had a heart pin resting on the top. That heart pin. I knew that heart pin. That was Father's hat. I gave him that heart pin before he left. That's when it hit me, like the picture of my father shattering. The man held such a cold and unfeeling look in his brown eyes. The wrinkles from his frowning so much were forever like hate-filled scars on his face. It was not hard to see those eyes had witnessed grisly sights. His left hand held a cream-colored letter. My heart stopped as fear set in. Please, Nye, I kept thinking, begging it not to be a death notice letter. He can't be dead. Not Father. He's a strong man, a good man. He couldn't be. My eyes watered as I took a step back, trying to escape the burning truth before me. The Nazi firmly cleared his throat. Is your mother around? The deep voice rang, filling our small townhouse. This was only the beginning of a nightmare come to life. Before I could say anything, he looked over my shoulder. Turning around, my mother was standing an inch from my body, with a worried look on her face. If I had been able to feel anything at that moment, I probably would have sensed her warmth as she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. But all I felt was the leaden weight of grief settling on me like an enemy under my skin. Mother stepped forward, but in her eyes were taking a step back, trying to run and hide just like me. Mother did not say anything, probably not knowing what to say. There was a painful moment of silence until the Nazi finally cleared his throat again. Mrs. Sophie Kuhn, a letter concerning Helmuth Kuhn. The Nazi handed Father a hat to Mother along with the eerie letter. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter. My heart felt as if it had fallen, like Father's picture, shattering pieces everywhere, as Mother held up what was clearly a death notice. A tide wave of numb grief forced itself through me, followed by a chill running down my back and sides. Pain slowly rushed in and grew faster and stronger as the wave of numbness subsided. I could not think. I could only feel the agonizing pain filling my heart and my mind with darkness. My face got warmer as my eyesight got blurry from my tears rushing down my cheeks. Mother stood there in pain-filled slices. Her sad blue eyes were overcrowded with tears as she trembled in shock. The Nazi cleared his throat again, catching Mother's attention. Mother's watery eyes met his. He looked behind his shoulder. Behind him stood 2 of the Gestapo officers. Mrs. Kuhn, we're going to have to escort you with us. We have some questions that need answers. No, you can't, I said, panicked. Eleanor, it's okay. Take care of everyone. While I'm away, Mother whispered into my ear as she gently placed Father's notice in my hand. Suddenly, Mother was pulled away from me. I could do nothing but watch in paralyzing anxiety as the Gestapos took her away. How can this be? I have had to watch my family being torn apart by Germany's great Hitler, but to me, he is Germany's great monster. The Nazi's eyes met mine again. Hallo, hallo, Heil Hitler, he proudly declared, stretching out his right hand before lowering his hand and slamming our door shut. The darkness of that empty hall only added to my hopelessness. Uncontrollable tears blurred my sight, the death notice still in my hand. Out of this pain, my broken family was now surrounded by anger. The anger built up inside me towards this war and Hitler. I didn't care if Hitler was our so-called leader. I hated him. I hated everything about him. My father was dead because of him. And I knew that as long as I lived, no matter what, no one, not even Hitler himself, could pull my brother Thomas in as a Nazi to twist and indoctrinate him with hate and lies. There was no concern for the consequences that stood before me. As long as I was still alive, I would fight with every last breath in me against this war with Hitler. 3 days had passed, and there was still no sign of Mother. Mentally, I was preparing myself to become my siblings' caretaker. My heart felt so dull, still shattered in pieces at that point. Assuming the worst had happened to Mother, by some tremendous miracle, Mother appeared by the end of the 3rd day. Her smile and delicate face, framed by her golden hair, no longer stood before us. She was covered in bruises and cuts. Her right eye was sealed shut from the purple and yellow swelling that inflamed her once calm and collected blue eyes. Dried up blood stained her nose and mouth. Her hair was ratted and greasy with blood stains on her blonde hair. Her soft and gentle caring hands now had missing fingers with mingled bloody stumps. It was clear that the questions they had for her included torture. Mother, originally from England, was lucky to have come back at all, even in this state. But after the horrors Mother faced within those 3 days, she was never the same. And our family's name since that day had been slandered throughout Hamburg. My siblings and I were looked down upon, yet none of us knew why. The only one who had the answers was Mother, but none of us had the nerve to ask Mother why this was happening. That's all I have.